This is a bread with more fiber, but it's not using whole wheat or oats or seeds. Instead, it calls for something that you probably throw away after brewing your morning coffee. Hey, Seraphin here, and as a coffee lover, I have spent coffee grounds left over from brewing coffee every day. Last time I made them into cookies, and now I'm putting the spent grounds into bread. It may sound crazy, but the bread actually tastes good and it may be healthier for us. There are several papers that have looked into the effects of consuming spent coffee grounds on health, and one study found that adding spent coffee ground fiber to biscuits made participants feel fuller after eating them. In other words, it promoted satiety. This resulted in the participants eating less of the biscuits ad libitum, resulting in less energy intake, which could help modulate body weight. These results sound really similar to common advice for weight loss that tell us to eat more fiber, because if you eat more fiber, you feel fuller, so you eat less overall. Another paper, a small human clinical trial, found that spent coffee ground fiber helped young adults sleep better. Additionally, aside from the fiber, spent coffee grounds contain other potentially beneficial compounds. And like coffee, the consumption of these grounds may benefit healthy gut bacteria. Ultimately, although much more research is needed, the results of studies on spent coffee ground consumption are quite positive for now. I talk about these results in more depth in the previous video on spent coffee grounds in cookies, so make sure to check it out for more information. The health benefits mentioned are a large part of why there's been a lot of research going into the use of spent coffee grounds in food. This is also a part of the attempt to reduce waste, of course, which makes a lot of sense because spent coffee grounds are apparently the ultimate waste product in the consumption of coffee. Personally, I found that aside from all of the above benefits, using these spent coffee grounds in bread adds in a more complex taste that pairs pretty well with both sweet and savory applications. It stands as an interesting ingredient on its own, especially if you like the look of dark loaves of bread like this. Instead of using charcoal powder, for example, to color the bread, I think that using spent coffee grounds can be more convenient. Okay, with all of that out of the way now, let's get into the recipe. So this is the bread we're making. It has a really rich and complex flavor with a gorgeous even crumb, and it's incredibly satisfying to eat. It also makes for a really good breakfast toast. We're also using both Tangzhong and Poolish to add flavor and soften the bread texture, keeping it soft for longer as well. Now, while the taste of coffee from the spent coffee grounds is relatively light, it does add a bit of bitterness. I like that in the bread, so I'm using around 13% of spent coffee grounds, baker's percentage, but you could lower it for a more neutral taste to somewhere around 10% baker's percentage. Like in the previous video on spent coffee grounds, I dried out the spent coffee grounds for a while before using them, so this is dry weight. So don't use the coffee grounds right after brewing coffee, and make sure to let them dry out at least a little. I also found that the coffee grounds pairs really well with some chocolate and a little bit of sweetness. That's why we add a bit of cocoa powder as well as honey. We're also folding in some dried cranberries to add a bit more sweetness and tang. Instead of dried cranberries, you could also use raisins or even chocolate chips for a sweeter bread. Another ingredient we're adding is yogurt, which adds a bit more acidity to the dough, and it also pairs really well with the other ingredients. There are actually some papers on the addition of coffee to yogurt, and after some tests with this recipe, I think that it makes the bread taste better. You could omit it, of course, just using water to replace it. Alright, now the first step of this recipe is to make the Tangzhong and Poolish. I usually do this the night before we make the bread dough. I typically like to make the Tangzhong first. It's super simple. All you need is some bread flour and boiling hot water. So we're going to pour in some boiling hot water from a kettle into this glass bowl. It's on top of the scale so that we can measure it. And immediately after that, we're adding in the bread flour and mixing everything together with a spatula. The gelatinization temperature needed for wheat flour is about 65 degrees Celsius, so we want to try to mix everything well before the water cools down too much, being very careful not to burn our hands, of course. It shouldn't take more than 2 minutes, and once the Tangzhong looks like this, with the flour well gelatinized, we're done. We'll cover the bowl and set it aside to cool to room temperature before putting it in the fridge overnight. For the time being, while the Tangzhong cools down, we're going to make the Poolish. Here we've got a small bowl with water, and we're going to add in an equal amount of flour. Following that, we toss in the instant yeast. Then we'll just mix everything together with a pair of chopsticks. All we need to do is mix for a few minutes, and we should be done. We'll cover the Poolish and let it rise for about an hour at room temperature before putting it in the fridge overnight along with the Tangzhong. By the end of fermentation, the Poolish should have risen to its peak and come down slightly, so it should no longer be dome-like in shape, but rather slightly concave like this. Due to differences in room temperature, you might have to adjust the timing for the Poolish. Okay, now that the Tangzhong and Poolish are done, we're going to start making the bread dough. Here we've got all our ingredients prepared, mise en place, and we've got a mixing bowl at the center. To it, we're going to add in the liquids first, so yogurt, scraping it in, and then honey, using the spatula to get it all in, and following that, water. After that, we throw in all of our spent coffee grounds, then cocoa powder, giving the glass a little tap, and following that, salt. Before we add the rest of the ingredients, we're going to mix everything together. This is important because it really prevents the cocoa powder and the spent coffee grounds from clumping up anywhere, so we want to take a moment to break down any lumps. You just want to make sure it's a nice and homogeneous mixture at the end. It should look something like this. With this, we add in the Tangzhong next. Giving that another good mix for a moment. The aim being to break up the basically solid Tangzhong into smaller pieces. Then we scoop in the fluffy Poolish using the spatula to get all the parts stuck to the glass. Again, we stir everything together just for a moment or two. Before finally adding in our bread flour. Here we'll set aside the spatula and use our scraper to mix the flour into the rest of the ingredients. Eventually, we'll switch to one hand, and we just want to continue this until the dough is well combined. This should take less than 5 minutes. We're not aiming for gluten development. We simply want to combine everything and hydrate all of the flour. The dough will feel somewhat dry at first, and you might need to put in a little bit of force to mix and knead it. But eventually, it'll become wet and sticky like this. When it looks like that, we're done. We'll cover the bowl and leave the dough to relax for 30 minutes. And after that time's up, we're going to do a set of stretch and folds. So at the side, we have a bowl of water, and dipping one hand into the water, we're going to stretch the dough out like this, pulling one end up and then folding it down. We repeat this 3 more times, one stretch and fold for each side. This will build the gluten in a very gentle way, and you want to make sure you don't pull too hard on the dough. When we're done, we'll cover the bowl and let the dough rest for another 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, the dough should have relaxed again, so we're going to basically laminate the bread dough. So we'll spray the work surface with water and then get the dough out onto it using our scraper. We want to stretch the dough out into an even layer, working pretty gently here, just stretching it out lightly until it becomes a rectangle like this. It doesn't need to be too thin, and you can spray a little more water here and there as needed. Now we want to add our dried cranberries, sprinkling them evenly over the dough. Again, instead of cranberries, you could use raisins or even chocolate chips to make the bread dough sweeter if you'd like. After we've spread the cranberries over the dough, we're going to fold it up, starting by folding in the sides, and then the top and bottom, stacking the layers on top of each other until they form a neat dough. Now we'll put this dough back in the bowl. Then we'll cover it and let the dough rise for another 30 minutes or until it's almost doubled in size. This can vary depending on room temperature, so make sure to keep an eye on your dough. Once the dough has finished its bulk fermentation, we can move on to shaping it. So we're going to dust the work surface with flour, and then we'll uncover the dough and scoop it out of the bowl. It is a pretty sticky dough, so make sure to add enough flour and have your scraper ready to loosen any dough stuck to the surface. We're going to shape it into a quick boule by first pulling and folding the bottom half up. You shouldn't need to use too much flour here. And then we pull in the sides, and after that pull in the top. Finally, we flip the dough over and round it out with our palms. This shaping process should build tension on top of the dough, giving us a smooth surface. Don't be surprised if a cranberry or two pops out. You can always stuff it back into the dough. And this is what the dough should roughly look like at the end. Now we're going to move on to proofing. So we have this bowl lined with a cloth, and I've already doused it with rice flour to prevent sticking, but as a double measure, I'm also going to cover the dough in a layer of bread flour. And then give it another coating of rice flour. This will help prevent the dough from sticking to the cloth, and I'd rather brush off excess flour later than have the dough stick to the cloth. After the dough is well coated, we'll just flip the dough over into the cloth-lined bowl, smooth side down and bottom side up. We're letting the dough proof for about 1 hour or until the dough almost doubles in size. Before the dough is done proofing, we're going to take the time to preheat the oven and the Dutch oven we're using to 250 degrees Celsius. When the dough and the oven are both ready, we can continue. We're going to take out the Dutch oven. Make sure to be very careful. It's very hot. We're going to put it down like this. And next, using a wooden board with some parchment, we'll take the dough out of the bowl. And we're going to score it. I'm doing a super simple score, just making one curve around the boule. This will give us a nice and raised ear. You could experiment with different scores if you'd like. After scoring, we'll place the dough inside the Dutch oven. Given that this is a high hydration dough and that we're using a Dutch oven to seal in the steam, I didn't add any ice cubes into it because it wasn't necessary to get a nice and crisp crust. Then we put the whole thing back into the oven and we'll bake with the dough covered for 25 minutes at 250 degrees Celsius before uncovering the dough and baking for another 20 minutes at 210 degrees Celsius. Every oven is different, so make sure to adjust these settings to your oven. And when the time's up, our bread is done. There are some cracks which could indicate that we could have used a bit more steam during the baking process, maybe a very small ice cube added to the Dutch oven, but aside from that, the ear is lovely and the crust is satisfyingly crisp. Just listen to that. Now, as with basically all bread, it's not a good idea to cut into this bread while it's still hot. You want to let it properly cool and for the structure to set so that you get a non-gummy crumb. And when it's cool, this is what the crumb should look like. It'll be soft and flavorful, meshing perfectly well with fruit jams or a bit of butter. Oh, it's so good. This bread is such a satisfying loaf, both in appearance and flavor. Knowing that it contains more fiber thanks to the spent coffee grounds is the icing on the cake. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching and bye!